the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
What is Christian Zionism? I'm going to give you just kind of a brief little overview, and there are more elements, but basically it's this understanding that the Jewish people today have a right to the promised land of the Old Testament that we hear about in Genesis chapter 12 and Genesis chapter 15. Now, if you were to look at that just for context, the promised land of the Old Testament goes far beyond conversations surrounding Iran, the Gaza Strip. It would overlap into West Jordan, South Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, and Palestine. So it's much larger territory than what we're talking about. And I think it's important that we have that bigger picture within the context. Now, within Christian Zionism is, again, one, the Jewish people have a right today to the promised land of the Old Testament. Also, the belief that the Jewish people are still the chosen people, and then the support for the current political state of Israel as Jewish, and that we have to have support for and prioritization, might I say, for the current political state of Israel. Additionally, within Christian Zionism, and this is where you start to see a lot of the mega churches traveling to Israel, not only to visit the holy places of Christ, but there's this overlap into this belief that we have to support the rebuilding of the temple, and that there needs to be a return to the Old Testament sacrifices, especially with a focus on the ancient bloody animal sacrifice of the red heifer. That's why actually, in fact, they're breeding in the Middle East, the red heifer. Again, there's more to all of this, but I'm really giving this overview because all of this is being tied somehow into Christianity. And for some, even Catholics think that some of these elements have to be there in order for Jesus Christ to come a second time. So where does the Catholic Church land on what we're going to call this as Christian Zionism? Well, first, let's start with this fact. You can respect people, but not believe that you have to follow a particular worldview. So we respect the Jewish people, our Jewish brothers and sisters, but we don't have to hold to the idea that they have a right to the promised land of the Old Testament. We also do not believe that we can do something to bring about the second coming of Christ. You see, Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament, and the Old Testament, also known as the Old Covenant, promises. We know this is talked about in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, that Jesus came to fulfill the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. See, Jesus even refers to his own body as the temple. So why are we trying to rebuild a temple in Israel as if we're recreating ancient Israel? He says, destroy this temple and I will raise it up again in 3 days. He's talking about his body. We just heard this during the Paschal mystery of Easter. In John chapter 2:21, we read the temple he had spoken of was his body. You see, Jesus is the fulfillment of all the Jewish sacrifices. And this is what we're looking at as Catholics understanding, looking at the Old Testament and the New Testament. The chosen people are not exclusively Israel. They are not exclusively the Jewish people. The chosen people are all nations made up of Jews and Gentiles alike. Look at your New Testament. It's in there. And that's why there's no permanent claim to the promised land for a particular group of people. Even if you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church and dive into this, Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 781 says, all these things, however, happened as a preparation for and figure of that new and perfect covenant which was to be ratified in Christ. The new covenant in his blood, he called together a race made up of Jews and Gentiles, which would be one, not according to the flesh, but in the spirit. You see, the church is the new people of God, composed of all nations. And we can't do anything to try and bring about the second coming of Christ, namely making sure there's temple sacrifice again for the Jewish people. So that kind of gives you a big picture of what's going on. Again, total respect for other people, other religions, but that doesn't mean we follow other people and other religions or that we can do something to bring about the second coming. I really wanted to walk through that, and I know it kind of was a little bit of a nitty-gritty before really setting the backdrop from a Catholic perspective of what's happening in this conversation surrounding Zionism and support for Israel.
That was the best of the week on Relevant Radio. The best way to listen to the best of the week is on the Relevant Radio app, free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.